Yesterday, reporters asked me if I thought President Putin was smart. I said, of course he's smart, to which I was greeted with, oh, that's such a terrible thing to say. I'd like to tell the truth. Yes, he's smart. The NATO nations, and indeed the world, as he looks over what's happening strategically with no repercussions or threats whatsoever, they're not so smart. They're looking the opposite of smart. If you take over Ukraine, we're going to sanction you, they say. Sanction? Well, that's a pretty weak statement. Putin is saying, oh, they're going to sanction me. They sanctioned me for the last 25 years. You mean I can take over a whole country and they're going to sanction me? You mean they're not going to blow us to pieces, at least psychologically? The problem is not that Putin is smart, which of course he's smart, but the real problem is that our leaders are dumb.
What is down there? Oh, it's Trump digging himself deeper into that hole. Because if there's one thing that you want to double down on as Russia wages a war that is so unpopular, even Hungarian dictator Viktor Orban is against it, it is praising just how smart Vladimir Putin is. This is Trump at CPAC taking the opportunity to show just how ready he is to reassume the presidency and lead the US through a world crisis like this by propping up a warmonger, shitting all over NATO, and then criticizing America's own leaders, which coincidentally is exactly what Putin is doing right now. Not for nothing, but if you find yourself repeating the same talking points as the tyrant currently isolated on the world stage for invading a sovereign country, you might have lost the plot. In reality, what Trump is trying to do, as ungracefully as humanly possible, is justify calling Vladimir Putin savvy and smart and genius while the guy was in the midst of invading Ukraine and satisfying his autocratic fever dreams. And his rationale is that Putin is doing this, quote, with no repercussions or threats whatsoever. Russia has faced consequences so swift and severe that its stock market has lost half its value. Its Nord Stream pipeline is dead, its oligarchs' assets frozen with a transatlantic task force being created expressly to ensure that Russian elites lose their yachts and mansions and funds. Its banks are being cut from SWIFT. By Monday morning, I'd imagine that the Russian economy will be close to destroyed. And yet Trump claims that Putin's acting with no repercussions or threats whatsoever. The thing about getting your news from Fox is that when it comes time to know things, you're left looking like Trump did on that stage. Trump went on to claim that these sanctions are no big deal because Russia's been contending with sanctions for the past 25 years. As if any of the past sanctions can even hold a candle to what Russia is contending with right now. Again, that country is being excommunicated from the entire international community. There will be runs on the banks, their oligarchs will lose all of their vacation homes and fancy dinners and fast cars and kids' colleges. This is all beyond clear. In fact, I interviewed Joe Biden and asked him about exactly this, why sanctions now are different from sanctions in 2008 and 2014 and 2016. We've seen sanctions get imposed on Putin after Georgia in 2008, after Crimea in 2014, election hacking in 2016.
Nothing like this, though. Look, you have two options. Start a third world war, go to war with Russia physically, or two, make sure that a country that acts so contrary to international law ends up paying a price for having done it. And there's no sanction that is immediate. It's not like you can sanction someone and say, you no longer are going to be able to be the president of Russia. But I think these sanctions, I know these sanctions are the broadest sanctions in history, and economic sanctions and political sanctions. And my goal from the very beginning was to make sure that I kept all of NATO and the European on the same page. Because the one thing I think that Putin thought he could do was split NATO, creating a great aperture for him to be able to walk through. And that hasn't happened, if you notice. It's been complete unanimity. And Russia will pay a serious price for this short-term and long-term, particularly long-term. And I think it's not only in Europe, but in the Pacific, Japan and South Korea and Australia. And I mean, so it's I think if the democracies of the world hold together, I think it increases the prospect that we're going to have less chaos rather than more.
The broadest sanctions in history. And somehow, once that fact makes its way into Donald Trump's twisted version of reality, it turns into nothing. I don't have to tell you that he's gaslighting you, because he's telling you he's gaslighting you. He then goes on to attack NATO, following a long history of doing exactly that. Trump's entire presidency was predicated on undermining that alliance and attacking our allies, while coddling autocrats and dictators like Vladimir Putin since the day he took office. I know that people like to point out the fact that Putin didn't try to annex any territory while Trump was in office, and that's true, but it's because he didn't need to. Trump did all of Putin's bidding for him. Putin didn't have to push back against any NATO encroachment because Trump was undermining NATO on his behalf. That Putin is panicking now isn't because he's acting from a position of strength, it's precisely because he's acting from a position of weakness. And finally, Trump uses this opportunity in front of the brilliant minds of these CPAC attendees, who are taking some precious time away from responding to lock up Hillary memes on Facebook, to call our leadership in the US dumb. And that's really what this is all about. At the end of the day, Trump is only looking out for an opportunity to attack Joe Biden because Trump wants to be president and Biden's standing in his way. This isn't about Russia, it's not about NATO, it's not about Ukraine, it's not even about the United States, it is about him. It's about Donald Trump. He will do or say anything he needs to, so long as it helps his own personal political future. So look, let's be honest here, this one's not hard. If you value democracy, don't side with the guy who thinks that Vladimir Putin is a genius. Don't side with the guy who most recently withheld $391 million in military aid to Ukraine because he was too busy trying to extort Ukraine's president for dirt on Biden. Don't side with the guy who still, to this day, continues to undermine NATO, which is the only alliance protecting the world's democracies. Because you can side with democracy, or you can side with Donald Trump, but not both. To see more videos like this, click the subscribe button right here on this screen. And if you want to support my work, subscribe to my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. I cover the most important stories each week, and my guest is always one of the top political figures, including Vice President Kamala Harris, Jen Psaki, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, Nancy Pelosi, Katie Porter, Cory Booker, and so many more. The podcast link is also right here on this screen, so give it a listen and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.